The late U.S. President Jimmy Carter served as the 39th President of the United States from 1977 to 1981. He was awarded the 2002 Nobel Peace Prize for work to find peaceful solutions to international conflicts, amongst others. He died on the 29th of December at 100 years of age and will be laid to rest on Thursday at the Washington National Cathedral. All 5 living U.S. presidents are expected to gather for his send-off. We reflect on his life and legacy with Vuyani Ngcuka, a former founder and board member of Habitat for Humanity South Africa, also a former mayor of Khayelitsha. And Brooks Spector joins us as well. He's a retired US diplomat and associate editor at the Daily Maverick. Good morning to the pair of you, and thank you so much for your time. Vuyani, you penned a tribute to late President Carter, hailing his efforts and hands-on approach to the Habitat for Humanity cause in South Africa. Tell us just a little bit about the organization and more about the role that Carter played that impressed you.
Good morning, ma'am, and good morning, viewers. Thanks for the opportunity to share the little experience that I had in working with him in 2002 in the place called then Sherwood in Durban, which we later called Etembeni, the place of hope. We were involved in the Habitat for Humanity, which came off as a result of the need in Khayelitsha to set up, to assist the homeless, to facilitate in setting up their own houses without, expect, but people facilitating, people helping themselves, forming savings group, working together as work teams and building their houses. So Habitat for Humanity has been central in enabling and empowering people to build their own houses. So we applied as the Habitat for Humanity of South Africa to host the Jimmy Carter Works program, which is normally hosted throughout the world by various cities and countries. And we were fortunate in that application that, that we will be hosting Jimmy Carter campaign, Jimmy Carter program in 2002.
Yeah. Thanks, Vuyani. What struck you about his work ethic and the project itself and his commitment to this particular cause in South Africa?
Imam, he was such like a humble servant. How do you really expect someone like of his stature, a president of the greatest, one of the greatest countries in the world, to subject himself to a site foreman? Now we have got layers in the construction site. We have got the project managers, we have got site foremen who do day-to-day monitoring of monitoring the building process. But he would listen to the site foreman. If the site foreman says his bricklaying is not in order to standard, or he needs to redo his work, he will easily comply with that.
Yeah. He
will play any role in that construction of that building. If he has to supply the material to the artisans, he will do that. If he has to lay the bricks, he will do that. And he will never stop and chat, except for the jokes here and there that he will share with the work team.
Yeah.
His sense of selflessness and motivation was just amazing.
Vuyani, thanks for those reflections. Appreciate that you're sharing quite personally how you saw him work and what his work ethic is. Brooks, as the world reflects on his political legacy, and despite the fact that he only served one term, he is described as getting less credit for his efforts than he deserved. Others describe his legacy as a checkered one. But let's start by looking back on his ambitions for America's foreign policy early into his term, wanting human rights to be a fundamental tenet of that policy. What did he achieve in that regard?
Well, good morning and good to be with you. And let me just add as a personal note, while I was still a diplomat, along with a bunch of others, we went to a Habitat for Humanity site and we dug foundations for homes here in South Africa as well. I wasn't very good at it, but you follow orders, dig this line and put foundation bricks here and do this and do that and come home and soak your back. Because that's not the normal kind of work one does. But put that aside, the question of human rights, it's something that animated a lot of us who were in the Foreign Service at the time, because yes, human rights as an idea, as an issue, has always been an element in American foreign policy, reaching back as far as revolutions in Europe in the mid-19th century. But what Jimmy Carter pushed for was a separate and official unit within the State Department that would monitor human rights issues globally and make it an integral part of policy. And one of the outcomes, a direct concrete outcome of this, was the annual Human Rights Report, which now is sort of like it's a secular Bible for NGOs and other governments around the world, because without any favoritism, it surveys the circumstances of 190 some countries and territories across the globe. It's a big, thick doorstop of a book, but it's crucial for anybody who follows foreign policy questions. And it's available, obviously, since his term in office. The other thing that I think one has to highlight, because it's something that seemed to be impossible, and that was to drag, almost literally, Anwar Sadat of Egypt and Menachem Begin of Israel off to Camp David, which is up in the Catoctin Mountains, about an hour plus from Washington, and basically lock them down so that they would stay there for 2 weeks. And he personally hammered out the peace plan between the two nations, which had at that point had 4 separate conflicts already. And it is, unlike so many peace plans that have been constructed in that part of the world or elsewhere, it still stands. The Sinai Peninsula was returned to Egypt. The two countries established diplomatic relations, which still stand. Now, they aren't, they aren't in love with each other, perhaps, but the relationship continues to exist. And it was Carter's attention to that detail work, which your previous guest was talking about in terms of building buildings. It stood him in good stead there. 2 other things which should be added to that list and which often get overlooked by the things we've just mentioned. One was the START treaty with the then Soviet Union on nuclear arms limitations. Now, the US Congress did not ratify it, but the 2 countries followed it anyway, and completing relations with China at a formal, official, diplomatic way. And as a footnote, you could add the Panama Canal Treaty, which returned the canal zone and the canal to the country of Panama. This was in fact recommended by the generals who feared that there would be riots and all kinds of violence across Central and Latin America if a resolution to the canal zone crisis was not achieved. And those are things that stand on the balance sheet, on the right-hand side, on the positive.
Brooks, if I may come in there, if I may come in, because I want to bring in, you touched on the Middle East, and I want to circle back to that. He and the ANC government today share the same position on Israel. and the rights of the Palestinian people, publishing a book in 2006 called Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, in which he equated Israel's occupation in the West Bank to the apartheid system of South Africa. He also called Israel's rule in the West Bank one of the worst examples of human rights deprivations that I know, saying it was worse than what we experienced in South Africa. How did this influence tangibly and practically the U.S. policy on Israel?
Well, let's put it this way. I don't think that book, which I haven't read for a long time, I don't think that had a direct influence, but I think it did have an impact in the sense that it reminded people that the issue, the discussion, the context mattered more than simply the relationship between the U.S. and Israel. Now, that book did not earn him any prizes among Israeli readers, I can tell you that, but it has over time come to have more of an impact, even if its judgments may be overdrawn by some people, than if he had not written it. And I think what it does demonstrate, or did demonstrate, was Jimmy Carter's absolute fidelity to the idea that issues have to be aired without regard to either personal feelings or the conventional wisdom, shall we say. But it also highlights something that we're not highlighting enough, really, that his behavior as president and afterwards was a direct reflection of his personal values and beliefs. The two almost, you couldn't separate them, let's put it that way. What he believed, what he taught in his Sunday school lessons to a congregation until he was in his late 90s in his hometown, were, it would appear to have been a direct reflection of his values, which in turn illuminated the way he behaved as president. And that's an example which, the longer his term of office recedes from us, the more importance that has come to be. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it is interesting. And again, we think about, and if there's time, we'll maybe go to the timing of his presidency in a post-Richard Nixon era, which was very different, the trajectory that he decided to design for America, particularly on its foreign policy. But Vuyani, we're talking about a legacy. You shared some personal anecdotes there about rubbing shoulders with President Jimmy Carter, and what struck you about his work ethic. As the world remembers his political legacy as well, what do you take away from his political legacy?
His political legacy is that of really reconciliation, that when you are offering a project like that, or in the housing project is in this case, and that offers opportunity for communities or families to come together and work together and reconcile their differences. Habitat believed that we are not only building homes, but we are building families. And the choice of that site, Sherwood, it was an upper class area, and coming together of a modest income family project. And secondly, that the conflicts that were surrounding that area, I mean, the KZN at that time, that is 2002, the project facilitated the working together of those communities, which at that time, there was so much conflict in that area. So his involvement and bringing together of different people of contrasting views was amazing. So what we honestly take is that of service that should be associated with him.
Brooks, maybe as a closer, we can talk about, again, this contrast between his approach and his predecessor, Richard Nixon, because we think of escalations in the Vietnam War, where Nixon authorized what we now know secret bombings on that country's neighbors, Cambodia and Laos, the Americans' activities in Chile, and the overthrow of President Salvador Allende in '72. The list is longer. What would it have taken to, and I don't know if the characterization is apt, go against the tide of his predecessor's approach?
Well, I don't think he was so much was going against the tide as much as he was saying, we're turning the page, that Richard Nixon's policies, both domestically and internationally, we can lay them out, discuss them, at great length. But Jimmy Carter came into office, though, remember there was an interregnum. Gerald Ford was the appointed president for about a year and a half in between. But Carter's moral stance was something that I think many people in the country really craved and were looking forward to. And if I can indulge a personal anecdote, I got married in 1976. My wife was South African, and we moved back to the U.S. because we obviously had to at the time. And Jimmy Carter's presidency was the thing that convinced her that this country, the U.S., wasn't as bad as she had thought as a student in South Africa in the 60s and the 70s. And as a result, I think that the further we get from Carter's presidency and his life eventually, the more we're going to reflect it's going to reflect in a positive way. Not every promise was achieved, and not every plan was perfect, and not every accomplishment goes without blemish. But I do think that we're going to hold him in higher esteem as a president than has been the case over the last 30, 40 years for many people, even in comparison to his post-presidential life, which, as your other guest was pointing out, has an extraordinary quality to it. And we have to just quickly mention in that post-presidential life, his Carter Center, which spent enormous amounts of energy and money raised to defeat the scourges of the number of diseases that were afflicting this continent, especially things like guinea worm, and river blindness, which were not, quote unquote, popular diseases for campaigns, but nevertheless had to be adjudicated and dealt with. And his Carter Center over the years has engaged in more than 100 observer missions in elections around the world, not for personal gain, obviously, but in the furtherance of that conjunction between human rights and democratic practice and possibilities. So on the whole, give the man more than just a gold star, give him a whole bunch, both for his presidential and his post-presidential life. I do believe that.
Well, thank you to both of you. Really do appreciate your time.